meeting to order, please. Hello. Okay. It's now 10:32. We're going to start the meeting. So I am officially calling this meeting to order. If you'd all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Melissa, roll call, please.
Michael Messina.
Here.
Mary Adler. Here. Ed Whitman.
Here.
Barbara Wills.
That position is vacant.
Carol Butter.
Okay. Things and times have changed over the years. To say that this is the way we always do it is not the right answer anymore. The fiduciary responsibility to establish an operational budget is a dual responsibility of the board, and equally important, the responsibility of the Lake Ridge Finance Committee, which has worked extremely hard over the years. And I continue to say, it's not the board that's the constant, it's the finance department committee. So thank you for those individuals who were on that. This meeting today is solely to share the 2024 operational budget. No other discussion points will be discussed or heard today during this meeting. Only budget. There is one exception that I'd like to set, because of course that's me. We mentioned that there's an open position. At the next board meeting, there will be a temporary appointment being made for a replacement board member. Just so you know. Other than that, we're only talking about the operational budget. This is a repeat message from prior regular open board meeting. There is a National Association for HOAs known as CAI, and this stands for Community Association Institute. There are several members of our Finance Committee, as well as all Lake Ridge board members, that attended this annual meeting, which was in October, where information is shared. This meeting is held timely in the fall as budget preparations across the country get underway for all HOAs. This gives insight to all HOAs what is to be expected in the following year. Across the country, HOA expenses have been experienced in 91% of all HOAs. 91%. Of this 91% of HOAs, 72% experienced increases in landscaping costs. In addition, 96% of the HOAs had increases in insurance costs, with 55% having increases between 11 and 25% for insurance. In addition, 11% of all HOA communities in the state of New Jersey have had their insurance policies canceled in the last year. So obviously, insurance is paramount for everyone, and increases that are across the country. One of the other drivers of expenses comes from a minimum wage increase mandated by the state, which fully impact our vendors who provide services. It's nice to say the minimum wage goes up, but that translates to somebody. I will now hand over the meeting to our Finance Committee for the presentation of the 2024 operational budget for Lake Ridge.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
As Mike said, we're going to just talk about the budget for 2024.
Can you take those down?
2024 budget, and I guess that's why we're here this morning. In 2024, our maintenance fees per month per household are going to increase $6 from $197 to $203. And that equates to $591 to $609 per quarter. So they're going up $6. Now this year, excuse me? $6.
$9 per quarter. No, I'm sorry, $18.
Everybody relax. Marty's my name and numbers is my game. They're going up $6 a month, and they're going up from $591 to $609 a quarter, which is $18 a quarter. Okay, but the key number is they're going up $6 a month, and that compares very favorably to last year's increase of $14 a month, and it's about a 3% increase, which is well in line with inflation. We don't want to pat ourselves on the back, but a lot of work has gone into bringing this number in this year, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. The way these numbers break down, our maintenance consists of two broad components, right? The funds that we need to run this place on a daily basis, and that's called the operating fund, or the operating budget. And the contribution that we have to make to our replacement reserves, we set aside a fund to maintain the infrastructure of Lakeridge. The roads, we have 300 acres in here, 13 miles of roads, 13,000 square foot clubhouse, an annex, many, many things that the developer gives you in transition, and I was at transition when it occurred. The assets are conveyed to you at no cost. It's buried in the cost of the homes, obviously. But we're required to maintain that. In order to do that, we set aside a replacement fund. We have an engineer come in every year, analyze what we've done, what we have to do. And the standard of accounting is we're required to provide for assets replacement that have an estimated useful life of 30 years. That's the standard we've set. Well, the point is that we've been here about 30 years now. First, people moved in 1995. I moved in 96. There might even have been someone in 94. I don't remember, Bill, do you? But we've been here almost 30 years, so things are wearing out. And as you know, the roads wore out, and we've had to replace those. We're in the midst of the final stages of that replacement, and that costs a bundle. And we'll talk about that. But this year, or for 2024, the $6 increase is comprised of only a 68-cent increase per month in the operating fund maintenance, and $5.32 is going to the replacement fund. So you can see what we're running into. Last year, of the $14 increase, $8.52 went to the operating fund, and $5.48 to the replacement fund. So this year, it's pretty much all replacement fund. And that's because the board, with the help of our new property manager, Ray Barnes over here. Ray, raise your hand so everybody knows you. He's done an amazing job. They went out to bid on major contractors and made some essential changes that have lowered the cost of operations. In particular, they're bringing in a new outside landscape contractor to take care of the lawns. And that resulted in a saving year to year, but it results in a very large saving over what the contractor that we presently have would have charged us next year. So I think the board deserves a pat on the back for that. And Ray, talking about the replacement fund, why is the contribution going up so much? I go over this every year, and if you've heard it all before and it's too much, just tell me, I'll stop. The road replacement is covered with asphalt, right? It's a highly viscous material, but it's comprised largely of petroleum. And it has aggregate and everything in there, and there's also labor costs associated with it and overhead. But what happened to us and every other community is that I went back and looked at our old reports. Back in 2004, the engineer estimated the cost of a square yard, and that's how we pay for the asphalt, was $5.63 a square yard. This year we spent $22.50 on the sections we replaced. And the forecast for next year is $24.75. So even though oil at one time was $25 a barrel, in 2004, whenever the Arabs raised it, it went to $100 a barrel. It's hovered over that level. I mean, it's down a little bit now, it's $76. But that doesn't mean that the asphalt is coming down; it's still going up. So that's become an expensive component. So over the years, the amounts we put in, no matter how much we adjusted it every year, never proved to be adequate enough with a line going like that on the cost of asphalt. So the good news is that when we finished the last section, there's only one section left, it's for Carrie up on the hill. We won't have to do it again for 25 years. Now, that's not the only thing we replaced, there's a lot of other things, but they don't cost anything like the roads. When we're done with the roads, we will have billed $4 million, $4.1 million. And we did all of that without any special assessments. Our goal is never to have special assessments. Our financial plan, is to set aside enough each month in maintenance with the help of engineering estimates to provide what we need to replace the infrastructure when it has to be replaced. And as you know, things do come up that you don't anticipate, like the project the board is working on now with the cladding on the clubhouse in the annex, where we had that artificial stone cladding. Mike can tell you more about it than I can, but it's rotted away behind it. And it has to be replaced because otherwise it'll lead to mold and so on. So they're in the throes of that. Now that was an unplanned cost, but it'll be covered by the replacement reserve. In other words, when we find things that should have been in the reserve, we put them in and fund them over 30 years. When the developer puts out a BOS statement to sell communities, it's not in his best interest to put a big number in the replacement reserve component. I mean, back in the original documents, the maintenance was $79 a month. And of that, only a few cents was going to the replacement reserve. The rest was the operating fund. Now, if you look at where we are now, that the operating fund component from 1995 is double, just a little bit over doubling. But in other words, back in 95, the maintenance was $79. The operating component was $70.31. Now it's $151. It only about doubled. But the reserve component was $8.69, and now it's $51.66 a month. It went up 6 times. So the developers notoriously understate that, probably to sell homes, or maybe they just don't know how to do it, I don't know. But as we find things, we add them to the reserve and fund them over 30 years. So that's the story with the replacement reserve. This year, with respect to the operating fund, as I said, the largest single thing that had an effect was the landscaping cost. And that number is going from a budget of last year of 462, and that's about what we're running now, to 439.9 next year. So it's dropping 30,000 budget to budget. But the outside contractor that we had quoted us a number like 470 something for 2004 if we kept him.
$66,000 less.
Yeah, so this is $66,000 less. So that is a good job. Now the rest of the items, we have ups and downs, and if you look at clubhouse and maintenance, you used to have a man who cleaned, who was an outside contractor. We hired him and put him in the maintenance department, and he ultimately left, so now we've gone back to an outside contractor. So it's one's over, one's under, but there's no big increase. So that's about it with the operating fund. By the end of the year, even though we spent all this money, we should still be in reasonably good shape. Nothing like we were. Our percent funded in the replacement fund used to be about 70%. Now, what does that mean? You don't have to fund everything today, the things that are going to replace 30 years from now. Let's take an asset that costs $200,000 that has a 20-year useful life. You would put away $10,000 a year over 20 years, right? So 10 years down the road, you should have $100,000. If you had $100,000 where you're required to have $200,000 ultimately, that's called fully funded. Well, we were 3 years ago 75% fully funded. No other community in the area is anywhere near that. The engineer tells us that there's horror stories. We dropped last year to 52 due to the roads. This year we're down to 41. We're 41% fully funded. So we will continue funding this replacement reserve over the next 30 years to get back where we should be. And at the end of the year, we should end with about the cash in all our funds, about $3 million, or about $2 million will be in the replacement reserve. So we're still in good shape. I mean, I don't want to worry you. We're in good shape. We were in better shape, but when you spend $4 million in a couple of years, you know, it takes a shot out of your reserve. So that's about it. Now, if anyone has any questions or would like me to go over any area more, I'd be delighted to do that. Did they set up any microphones?
Yeah, we have microphone set up on the other side.
Yeah, I mean, is there anything, anyone want any more information on anything? I don't want to run off. Yeah, here comes a man. Hey.
Phil Lucas from 3314 Deep River Lane.
Good morning.
Good morning. In your budget analysis, which is for a year, do you have, as a background, a 5 or a 10-year plan as to what your expenditures are going to be?
No, we do not engage in long-term financial planning. And the reason for that is, we do it in a sense in our replacement reserve, which is the biggest expenditure we have. That we have an engineer look at every year, and he calculates the projection of costs over 30 years for us, and we get a report. With respect to our annual operating budget, we do not do a 5-year on that, because that is pretty static. We would not get much out of doing a 5-year plan on that. You understand what I mean?
Yes.
Because it's pretty much just the cost of operating the clubhouse here.
Okay, now, my next question to you is, in your long-term projections, as an example you gave, are you anticipating what the replacement cost is going to be at that point in time?
Yes.
Well, this is a little confusing, but it's a very good question. The engineer does not factor in economics into the projection. They run the database each year. That means all of the equipment and assets we have against something called the RL, is it RL means, which is a database used in the economy to price out things like this. So by doing it each year, we calculate inflation. We adjust for inflation. Now, the other thing we don't do is we don't include interest income in the fund as a plus. Although the assets are invested in CDs and so on, and we're earning interest now that we're back to a more normal interest rate period. We don't include that in that analysis, so that partially offsets the effect of inflation. And then the Finance Committee, Bill Cohen here, who's our chairman, does a separate analysis internally where we factor in inflation and include the interest income, and we still come out with the same answer, that our funding strategy is sound over 30 years. So I hope that answered your question.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else?
Hi, Marty.
Hey, good morning.
How are you?
Good to see you. Thank you.
Good. Elaine
Elaine,
Sotomayor.
Elaine, yeah.
Hi. I have a question. How come we always get compared to other communities when really other communities are not apples to apples?
Well, you're right. No comparison of any community to another community is identical because, for instance, we have an indoor pool and an outdoor pool, and another community may not have an indoor pool, and so on. But you have to compare to something. What are we going to compare ourselves to? The government or a church?
To
Or a
ourselves.
church? You can only, if you're going to use the term compare, you got to compare to something. We do not agonize any longer over comparing to other communities. You know, years ago, I used to include a chart in here of all the maintenance of the other communities in the area. We were always the lowest, or next to the lowest. Greenbrier Woodlands used to be a tad lower, but I think now with their golf course problems, they might be very comparable. And they don't have an indoor pool, they have a golf course. So, you're right, technically you can, but we don't put it in the report anymore.
Good, thank you. You're an original owner, right? You're here 28 years?
Something like that.
Yeah. Has Lake Ridge ever had an assessment in 28 years?
1 year, we had a terrible snowstorm 1 year. We spent $100,000, $80,000 on snow removal. We had a $100 assessment just for snow. Now, in our budget, we provide $60,000 a year now. We used to provide $100,000, but we cut it back. $15,000 in the snow months of, October, November, December, and January. And usually it ends up as a favorable variance at the end of the year, at least part of it, because we don't have that much snow.
So you don't anticipate for any reason, lawsuits, anything, that there would be an assessment?
Well, we certainly don't anticipate any lawsuit, but no, we do not like special assessments. It's hard for people. Some communities run that way. They keep their replacement reserve very low, and every time they want to do something, they have an assessment. But it's very hard for people to plan if all of a sudden you get a letter from the board telling you that there's a $500 assessment. And, I know a guy that bought a place in another town, a vacation home. He moved in, he got a $6,000 assessment for the roof. The day he moved in, or the week he moved in. So, no, we don't do that.
I just want you to ease everybody's minds that you don't anticipate any assessments coming for any reason.
Well, I certainly don't know. I don't see the future perfectly. I'm a human being. I don't know what's coming down the road, but our history is that we try to anticipate costs and provide for them annually to avoid assessments.
Thank you, Marty.
Okay.
I always appreciate you.
Good to
Thank
see
you.
you.
You too, thank you.
You're welcome. I think you're next. I don't know. Who's next?
Hello, it's Carl Greco, 2647 Medley Drive. Just a question, maybe you can help us enlighten on the biggest component of our expenses being the landscape and grounds maintenance. You said our current contractor was going to increase it by a large number. I'm just wondering about how we went about evaluating and choosing a replacement contractor, low bidder, is there a quality factor in there, reputation, how do we go about that?
Well, I'm going to have to ask the board to answer that because they actually do that. I don't know, Mike or Ray? Ray?
What we did this year, and it wasn't only the landscaping contract, but it was at least 13 different vendors that we used, went out to 4 to 5 different contractors that provided the same service and provided quotes on an apples-to-apples basis. What we did with landscaping, in fact, was five contractors that were vetted by the CAI organization that I've seen or had brought them in, we took them around to make sure that, number one, they had the resources and overhead to handle a community this size. What we also did is make sure that they were available to keep the schedule that Turf Masters were providing. In the long run, it was a matter of cost with Meticulous, the new contractor. It was a matter that they could provide a dedicated crew to Lake Ridge itself. So we would not have to change out here and there. They also offered extra services going in there to where with Turf Masters on your final two cuts, they cut the grass and the leaves. Meticulous was providing a separate leaf cleanup in December that would help out. Their costs for providing the same, and I'll give you, the numbers actually were for close to $489,000 quoted by Turf Master for 2024. Meticulous came in at $417,000, and it was based on the same or more services provided by Turf Masters. They've been around for 20 years, specifically in Ocean County. I've had 3 sites myself that I had them there. And then they came in, each interviewer came in and met with the board, went through their grilling and had a Q&A sessions. They were very familiar, made sure everybody was very familiar with the site as well. So there was a lot of work put into it. It took about 60 to 90 days, because I went out starting in August to get these costs and these contracts. Landscaping, it's always a gamut. You know, we got a new guy coming in, Turf Masters have been here forever. There may be but some skips and stones going, but based on what their performance that I've seen and what they're offering, we're hoping for a very good relationship. But a lot of work went into vetting these companies.
Okay, thank you very much, appreciate it.
Thank you, Ray. Yes.
Hi, Roseanne Vasicchio from Blissfield Lane. I have a great question. I know the answer, but I'm gonna go for it. The snow removal. We had no snow last year. So does that mean we get a discount on our HOA bill?
Yeah, the way that works.
Oh, here we go.
At the end of the year, we either have a surplus or a deficit. Now, Lake Ridge has never operated at a deficit. We have an option at the end of the year. If we have a surplus, we could prepare 926 checks and send them out, which is a lot of work and costly. And we can carry the surplus over and reduce next year's maintenance.
I think the checks sound good.
No, we don't do that. We don't
I'm happy to write them out for
We
you.
don't do that. What we do is we carry over the surplus
Okay.
and reduce next year's maintenance. It's cheaper for you, it's more accurate, and you get the absolute same result. I know it's hard for people to understand that, but that's the way it works.
No, you see, what my problem is, excuse me,
Yeah,
the people that live alone, that don't have a mate or a husband or whatever, they find the HOA not too bad. But if you're living alone, like I live alone and so do a lot of other people, the HOA, when it rises every year, is kind of difficult. So I look for any way for you guys to give us a break. Even if I promise never to go to the pool, you don't get a break. I tried that.
A couple of comments, and I understand.
You know what I'm saying?
I understand exactly what you're saying. Couple of things, you have to be realistic. We are not insulated from inflation. I mean, if you go to the store, you see food's going up. Well, our costs are going up too. What we try to do is take a look at how our increase relates to inflation, and we're actually going up lower than inflation this year. And we can't do any better than that. With respect to giving a refund, it works better than credit it to the next year.
I think it's good to take a vote on getting a check back than having what you said. That's how.
That's a management decision, and that decision is made.
All right, thank you.
Remember one thing, if you had a deficit, remember this. Well, I'm going to continue answering your question because you're walking away without a complete answer. If we had a deficit rather than a a surplus and we've never had a deficit, we'd send you a bill for additional maintenance if we did it that way. Whereas this way we would carry it over and adjust next year's for the carryover. So it's just cheaper to do it that way and it's easier. You know what a postage stamp costs. I mean, why would we want to do that? So, anybody, yes?
Hi, Joan, 2398 Torrington. You might just answer partial question.
Can't hear you.
Hers, but, so you say that we have, when you have a surplus, you carry it over, where does it go?
It reduces next year's maintenance. It becomes a credit.
So it automatically goes just to maintenance?
Well, yeah, it goes against the.
Oh, because you have other categories here, that's why I was
No,
just saying.
The surplus is in the operating fund, so it's carried over and reduces the cost in the operating fund the next year when we do the calculation of maintenance.
So if you, and then you reduce the snow removal. So what happened, and I
No,
wanna
the snow removal favorable variance becomes a component of the overall favorable variance. There are favorable variances and unfavorable variances in all categories. Snow turns out to be a favorable variance. You add them all up at the end of the year, and that's your carryover surplus. In other words, you budgeted costs at some level, and they came in lower. So that carries over, reduces next year's maintenance calculation.
So what happened the year, not to go back, but since you know the answer, what happened the year that there was a snowstorm and there was a $100 assessment? Like there was no surplus that year? What happened?
We never had a deficit, so there was a surplus, but there would have been, there may not have been if we didn't have the assessment. I mean, if all of a sudden you get a $100,000 bill for snow removal, you know.
And you budget 60,000.
Well, we didn't, I don't know what we
Or whatever,
had, we
yeah.
had more than 100,000 that year. I'd be glad to go back and look at that year and
I'm
report
just
it.
curious, just because I don't know.
Yeah.
So
It was
just
a lot
trying-
of snow that year, and we had, they came out a lot of times.
I get it.
Just to add to that, there's an assumption made when you create a budget. Who knows how much snow's gonna fall? So the assumption is made that we will get 3 inches of snow once a month for 4 months. What if it's 6 inches? We pay more. So it's a shot in the dark.
And if we had heavy costs of snow one year, we would take a look at all of our other categories and see how far over budget we're running or under budget. If we were running a favorable surplus, we could absorb the snow overrun, we would not have an assessment. Our goal is to have 0 assessment, and that's our goal. One year, we absolutely had to do it because the bills were so great.
To go back to a prior question, right now, what we can see, there is no assessments on the horizon. If we get slammed with snow, I don't know if that holds true because we don't know today if it's gonna snow. But there are no assessments on the horizon that we can see at this point on this day. We pray for as little snow as possible.
No other questions? I know we thanked him, but I'd like to thank Bill Cohen, again, the chairman of the finance committee, and all the other guys on the committee, and Ray Barnes in particular, our new property manager, who really did a lot of work in helping us with the budget. Thank you very much.
Just to add a couple of points. It's hard to keep track of things. I had to go to Ray this morning. There were 12 contracts reviewed this year. It's a number. Is that a big number? Is that a little number? As it turns out, a lot of contracts came due this year. Right now, all the contracts for next year have been signed already here at the end of November. So we're ahead of the game. A lot of these contracts, we decided to do multi-year contracts. If you lock in that vendor now and you say, listen, what will you do for me for a 3-year contract? I want to hear 2% this year. I want to hear 3% the year after. If you lock it in now, it avoids the possibility of higher estimates being given down the road. So that's some of the things that we've done. there were a lot of things that had no contract. I don't know why, lapsed, whatever happened, but as an example, the HVAC system, heating and ventilation and such, that had no contract. So when we call a vendor, it's like he comes when he wants. That's unheard, I mean, you can't have that, right? So a lot of work went into this. I'm gonna give an example. The reserve money that goes in, this year, we looked at, it's called KIPCOM as the company, and we look at 20 years out from today. One of the things that was in there was the retention walls. There are 11 retention walls throughout the community. The HOA assumed responsibility for those retention walls, not the homeowner. So when we looked in the report, I said, when you have to replace these retention walls, the number that was in there was $120,000. The actual cost is $499,000. That's present standard, which, by the way, you don't change retention walls with lumber anymore, you do concrete block. So we readjusted that now, saying our walls are running out, the life expectancy is gonna run out in about 8 years. So in 8 years, if you don't have $499,000, there's gonna be a problem. So things like that, foresight into the future, I think Mr. Lucas brought up a point. Things like that you have to keep looking at year after year. When will we need to redo, let's say, this ballroom? When will we need new chairs? When will we need to do something else? So a lot of insight went in. We sat down with the company and said, we did this, we should move this up, so forth and so on. So we keep adjusting that to keep it in tune and keep the money relative to what the environment will be now. Not 25 years ago, $120,000 for retention walls. So it took a lot of hard work, and I'm going to thank Ray for that, the board. You know, I can't tell you how many companies we met with and interviewed, and we found this $70,000 reduction, which actually made this a tolerable increase. Now you could say it should be zero. Okay, the reality is nothing is zero. Things go up. So the problem that will exist for next year is every year you have to be looking for a reduction to offset inflation. Now the problem that happens is after several years of the board doing their job correctly, there's only so much tightening of the belt that's available. At some point you've become lean. I wish that was me, but it's not the case. But I'm saying, you know, to find these big chunks of money in contracts, I don't know what's gonna happen next year, because I don't know where we can go next. And I'm not even gonna say, you know, any thoughts about it. I just wanna get through this year to start. We'll worry about next year's. So, and our insurance went up 12%, which was around the national average. Landscaping costs we discussed, and one of the things, the guard at the gate, the landscapers, whoever does anything for us, they pay their people, and minimum wage went up. So we discussed that. So to say that there's no increase, it's hard to do that. So overall, it represents a 3% increase from last year. And as Marty said, only 68 cents, I believe, or 66 cents. 68 cents was in the operational budget, and the rest was in the reserve. But if you look at the reserve, that money is the plan for what's coming down the road. So that this board has to look to pass on the baton to the next board so that they're not in a bind and no assessment down the road. Right? So that's the continuity. That's really all I have. We did our question and answer. Ron, you have another question?
Mike, when will they do the roads up by us?
So here's the thing, by us, for Carrie. We are not planning to do anything next year. That in itself saves approximately $450,000 we can accumulate in our reserve. So we're gonna sit tight. I'm not saying that we're gonna skip a second year, but in reality, every year we do that, we build up our reserve. Because you don't, it's like, you have a savings account, and if it gets below $200 or $500 or $1,000, you don't feel comfortable? Well, you know, it's the So by skipping the paving for next year, we could say we can reinvest $450,000. Now, here's the problem with that, because I always look at both sides. What's the price of oil gonna be? What's the price of labor gonna be? You're shooting craps here. It is possible that we're gonna build up our reserve, but in the bottom line, it could bite you, that suddenly it would have cost more to delay it a year. That's a crapshoot. And that's something the board tries to figure out along with finance. Does it make sense? Right? Does that answer your question? All right, is there any other question? I know, okay, come on up.
I'm John from Braddock Road.
How you doing, John?
How do we have the reserves invested? Are they getting an interest rate?
That's a Marty question.
All the reserves are different, but speaking about the replacement reserve, it's mainly in certificates of deposit and in U.S. Treasury notes and in money market funds, but largely in CDs and $1.4 million in U.S. Treasury notes.
Okay, isn't like approximately 5% or you don't know?
Well, I know, the money market's well over 5% now. The CD reinvestment rate this week was 5.2%. And the Treasury notes are at a lower rate because we put them in. We came out of a very low rate era. Remember, we were getting 0.5%? And we took that money and were able to get like 2 3/4% in U.S. Treasury notes, and we took it. And it ultimately went higher. But we were so glad to get 2.75 and we were getting nothing that we took it. So that's how it's invested.
Thank you very much.
Michael, I'd like to make a nomination to accept the 2024 budget. Anyone second?
I second it.
All in favor?
Say aye. Any nays? Seeing as the ayes have it, the motion to pass the 2024 budget has passed. Well, that's really it for the meeting. We'll be around for questions after as needed, and thank you all for coming.